we're gonna chat a little bit about the Women's Super League, because I think at this point in Women's Super League, you have all these teams who have at least hit the halfway mark of their
Yeah.
season. So you're looking at all of these clubs, and they've got anywhere from 13 games played to I think Everton unfortunately is the one team I think with only 10 matches thus far. Listen, and we've chatted about that before in the past. There's unfortunately been some instances where they've had to reschedule or cancel some games, but at this point, over the course of their campaign, teams are hitting that halfway mark. So where are some of these teams sitting right now? Ton of action coming out of this weekend, and I think we really need to start with Man City and Bunny Shaw, Lisa.
We have to, because this Bunny Shaw is just freaking crushing it right now. So Man City is climbing the table right there. They're looking to keep getting in that top 3 spot. They're standing in 4th place after last weekend's games, but they're coming off of a win. And for Man City to get this 2-0 win over Leicester, massive for them right there. They're coming off of 3, consecutively throughout the season. Like they're struggling a little bit in terms of like getting those shutouts and ordering to like secure points to climb up the board. But in this game, Bunny Shaw ends up scoring the opening goal, the game winner, because it was a 2-0 win for Man City. And for Bunny Shaw, this puts her at the top of the leaderboard for the Women's Super League. She's got 10 goals on the year. She's leading that Golden Boot race. She's got some players on her heels for sure. A couple of players sliding into second place with 9 goals. But holy cow, Bunny Shaw, it's so fun to watch this player and what she's able to do at Man City. It's been a joy. And this weekend, the goals that she was able to get and the celebrations that came from the Women's Super League, I mean, I had a great time watching it this weekend. But this is one of the players that stands out to me as someone that I am so eager to watch week in and week out. Yeah, it's incredible to see with Bunny Shaw. And because that Man City, then they get that win, they jump up to 4th place and sitting right behind Arsenal in 3rd, who's Arsenal is struggling a little bit to get into the top 3. They're trying to chase Chelsea, trying to chase Manchester United, and the Gunners just can't really do it at this point. They're falling flat.
Yeah, it's I think it's important to note that it's the halfway mark, because I just feel like the table at this point for Women's Super League is going to start to kind of level itself out. I remember when we previewed Women's Super League, and then when we kind of gave like a first quarter update of standings, like where teams were after about maybe 6 to 8 games played. I think at this point, when you can effectively take a look at the table and say like, all right, like halfway point team have double digit matches, all right, already at this point. It's actually Brighton and Hove that's actually got the 10 games only, and not Everton. But that aside, double-digit matches, and then you have to imagine that at least from 1 through, obviously the top 4, but at least maybe 1 through 4, 1 through 6 maybe, and maybe that's being generous, that is where things are going to maybe start kind of leveling their things out. And I'm with you in terms of, Manchester City and kind of dropping points essentially. Like if you don't lock up those games, look where it's going to keep you, and it's going to keep you in that fourth position.
Yeah.
I think if you can maybe even look at their last stretch of games, three wins, 2 draws. If they even pick up a win out of one of those draws, like what, how does this table look, or where are they sitting, right? So, but yeah, had to give some love to Bunny Shaw for a little bit, because as we're cranking up to the World Cup and chatting about all things Australia and New Zealand and all these qualifying nations that are going to build up to the World Cup, like we're keeping an eye on Bunny Shaw, because we're here for CONCACAF, right? We're here to chat all about that as well, and we love to see Reggae Girls getting this success with their clubs across the globe. So the fact that she's leading,
Mm-hmm.
Women's Super League with 10 goals right now is
Massive.
not just remarkable, but it's delightful. You'll love to see it. You'll love to chat about it. You'll love to talk about it. But I don't know. I just think like with the games remaining, with the games in front of some of these teams, like I said, like I think that things are just going to start to to level out a little bit. I don't anticipate, within the top four, what Chelsea, Manchester United, Arsenal, even with their, even with some of
Yeah.
their struggles, Man City, that we're going to see a huge leap in terms of, or a huge shift in terms of that top four. Because if you're even looking at the points total between first and fifth place, even at this time, you've got Everton with 19 points in fifth,
Mhm.
and then you've got Chelsea with 31. So even
Yeah.
with Man United in second right now with 29 points, it's a 10-point swing between 2 and 5 in terms of the standings. So it's going to be exciting to keep an eye on, I think, in terms of how that top four kind of settle out.
Yeah.
But I don't
And
I don't
and
anticipate
and we
going
knew
up.
that, right? Like,
Yeah.
historically, the Super League, it's a tale of two halves, right, of the table, essentially. But when I think it's super interesting when you kind of zoom in on the top four, Chelsea, um, Manchester United, Arsenal, and Man City, that's pretty close because Arsenal dropped points on their last two matches that they played in the Super League, right? They had the FA Cup in between there, where of course they're dominating, and then before that, or before the FA Cup, that was one of their matches that got postponed. I know we talked about that what feels like ages ago, but then they tied 1-1 with Chelsea, and now Arsenal coming off this 0-0 draw with West Ham. Those are crucial points that they just dropped in order to kind of catch up with Chelsea at this point. Because if they get one of those wins, they're at 29 points and they're tied for second with Manchester United at this point. So Arsenal is a team that, I mean, yes, they're dealing with a lot of injury troubles right now. They're missing a lot of their top scorers, and it's affecting Arsenal with what they've been able to do, frankly. And that's what I'm looking at, right? Like, those are the marginal points where Arsenal dropping to this weekend to West Ham. Like, hey, great for West Ham. They get a shutout. It's a 0-0 for them, and they end up splitting points and climbing up the table. But like, I just zoom in on the top four, the top five, and that's where the elbows are thrown. And that's where it becomes really, really a tight race at the top of the standings.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at like individual performances, like you could find some parodies there, like in terms of clubs represented, right? Like we're talking a lot about Bunny Shaw and the fact that she's got 10 goals right now with Man City, but right behind her is Rachel Daley,
Yeah.
Villa with 9. So it's like, even though Villa's kind of sitting in that 6th seed right now, like there's some individual performances that you could look at throughout some of these clubs that are kind of standing out and breaking out.
We haven't talked about Rachel Daley
Yes.
really that much since she made the move from Houston Dash to Aston Villa, and you're cracking up about it because it's true. We really haven't. She is right at the top of that Golden Boot race, as you just said, with 9 goals. Even Villa, they're 6th in the standings right now. They're coming off of 3 straight games undefeated for them in the Women's Super League, and I'm frankly, like, I'm pretty happy with what we're seeing from Rachel Daley, right? Like, I am, in terms of what was able to happen. I think when my mindset and like kind of thinking about when Rachel Daley announced she was going to leave Houston, she was going to leave the NWSL after 6 years playing with Houston, it was kind of like, okay, how is she going to find her groove at another team where she's maybe not the top head dog anymore, or she's not the entire face of the franchise? And that's exactly what she was at Houston. And I've been really pleased and really impressed with what we've seen from Rachel Daley, the leadership that she has taken on at Villa, and kind of how she's been able to lead the charge there for that team and leading the goals, and 9 overall in the season. I don't know. We hadn't talked about her. I wanted to ask about her. What do you think about Rachel Daley? How do you think she's doing?
I think that it was a good move
Mhm.
by Villa. Look, we talked about, yes, when you're looking at the actual table and you're like, oh, like, Villa's there at 6, but then sort of comparing that to the actual points, right? Like, what's the difference? What's the gap, perhaps between like 1 and 6? They're sitting there
Mhm.
6, but it's with 17 points compared to Chelsea's at 1 with 31, right? So, and mostly level in games, right? In this point, have 12 matches played in their season at this point. But I think when you're making a move like that, and some of the other additions that they've had to the team, I think part of what this particular campaign was going to look like for them was trying to see those strong individual breakout performances, and then hopefully build on that for next season as well. So I think if they can continue to keep pace, kind of like that sort of tight kind of middle of the pack kind of area in the standing. I don't think that's necessarily going to be viewed as a disappointment for that franchise, because this is a franchise that is, that wants to try to build and to, have a competitive run. For it to have their place perhaps within the top four. Don't think that's going to happen this season, but who knows what they can build on for the next one. But it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough to sort of knock Chelsea off their throne, so to speak. They've got Sam Kerr, who's ridiculous, is always in front of goal, and
right
it's just the top four right now. It's very narrow, it's very competitive, and I think just sort of coming out of even this transfer window, like all of the constant chatter around like who's leaving where, like are we going to see Lizzie Russo like swap teams here, like what's going to happen there. I think the fact that we heard so much chatter on that, like there are teams that know at this point in their season they are either going to roll with the squad that they have, or they are going to try to make a move to make that push, to make that leap. So at this point, it just sort of seems like this is how the dice is going to continue to roll. But we're going to keep an eye on it for sure. Exciting when you start getting, I think, into those. We get this way with NWSL too. Like right when you get into like that halfway point, you're like, all right, let's take a look. Mm-hmm. What's realistic here? What's a little bit unrealistic? Let's start making some predictions, et cetera. But I think this is going to be the comfortable four moving forward, which we had talked about in earlier episodes as well. I just see Chelsea kind of continuing their run, and while it might come down, who knows? We even talked about that in our preview of Women's Super League. We're like, is this going to be another season where winning the league comes down to the last match day weekend? And who knows? It's gearing up for that, maybe.
That is what I would love to see. That was like one of the most exciting parts of last year. But I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's hard to tell because, right, as you said, we're at the halfway point of the season. I mean, Chelsea's at the top. Who's going to knock them off first, right? If anyone does.